Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining us today for Here Center's first ever parent workshop. Today we're going to be looking at your daily routines that you do with your child every day, like waking up in the morning, getting ready, eating together, getting ready for bed, and how these daily routines can actually be really awesome opportunities to strengthen language and communication skills. So this being our first parent workshop, we're definitely going to want to hear some feedback from you. Any suggestions on how to make this more helpful is totally welcome. So feel free to either at the end of the presentation, leave a comment in the chat box or unmute yourself and talk to us in the Q&A section or send us an email. So the goal of this presentation is just to show you that it doesn't really need to be complicated to infuse language in your everyday life, and that we have a lot of power and agency into strengthening our child's language skills. So first, we're going to do a little quick 101 on the differences between speech and language, and then we'll also kind of examine how these two things are developed in children as they grow up. Second, we're going to explain why combining language into your daily routines is helpful for strengthening those skills. Your day-to-day life is full of opportunities to strengthen your child's abilities, and in this section, we'll talk about why that is. And lastly, we'll show you how to use the routines to strengthen language. The great thing is, you don't need to change anything that you're already doing. You can keep your routines, you can keep your activities. You just need to keep a few principles in mind to turn these activities into a bit more language learning friendly. We want to give a huge shout out to Michelle Lutz, a SLPA at Here Center, who created these wonderful, beautiful infographics. And this presentation was designed almost entirely from these two pieces. So we're really grateful to Michelle for creating these for us today. And at a glance, just to explain what you're looking at, these just show you how to add language into the things you do every day with your child. Bedtime, dressing up, eating. Over time, incorporating language into these activities strengthens your child's skills. So in this presentation, we're basically expanding on the information in these infographics and just how you can use them in your daily life. Okay, so let's just really quickly talk about what speech and language is in general. What's speech? What's language? How do we learn to talk? So, what is speech? In the word cat, so a cat is a pet, there are three sounds: the k, the a, and the t. When we break down a word and sort of examine how each sound is pronounced, we're examining speech. So speech is how we say sounds and words. As children grow up, you may hear them mispronounce some words, which can be quite normal depending on their age. To break it down a little further, we can look at a child's speech through their articulation. Wabbit versus rabbit is a common mispronunciation. That's kind of normal in development. How's the quality of your child's voice? Is it soft? Is it loud? Does it have a sort of rasp to it? Speech also involves fluency. So like stuttering and repeating sounds, these are some things that can happen with a child's speech. And if you're slightly panicking maybe right now because you notice, oh yeah, my child is actually making kind of some errors with their speech, well, allow me to inform you that there is actually a natural order to how speech sounds develop. Let's take a look at that on the next slide. So on this graphic on the left from the Virginia Department of Education, we see three different sections: early developing sounds, middle developing sounds, and later developing sounds. And this is pretty self-explanatory. This chart basically shows us that at different ages and stages of our child's life, they're more comfortable saying certain sounds compared to others. So for example, when your child is between 2 years and maybe 4 years old, they're not really going to be saying sounds with the R sound. So red, rice, rest. Mastery with the R sound is something that appears when they're around 5 to maybe 7 years old. So maybe that gives you some relief or reassurance if you notice your child is having some errors with their speech. For all you know, they might just be following their natural speech sound development. In time, they may learn how to use that sound correctly. So if speech is how we say sounds and words, then language is the what. Language is what we say to communicate to others, how we make requests, and share our thoughts and ideas. And to understand and use language on a daily basis, you have to know a couple things. So you have to understand what words mean. If you didn't understand English, everything that I would be saying to you right now would be gibberish. Language is also how we arrange sentences together. So I have to make sure that I'm speaking to you in a way that makes sense and is clear. Language is also socially knowing what to say and when to say it. Is what I'm saying to you right now appropriate in this context? Yeah, I'm providing you knowledge and information because this is a presentation, a workshop. To break it down even a little bit more further, there are two flavors of language that's important to know. So language is a combination of two things: how we express ourselves, either through speaking like I am right now, writing, or maybe using alternative systems like an iPad. And language is also understanding. It's reading, listening, taking in information. As we grow up, we use a lot more receptive skills than expressive, right? So before your child says their first word, even though they're not speaking, they're still understanding language, right? They're still listening, taking in information. And when children go to school, they use these two skills on a daily basis. Your child has to understand directions that the teacher gives them. They have to complete homework, tasks, and then respond to their teachers and classmates. These two language skills are really quite necessary to be successful and learn in school. And speech and language skills, they don't develop overnight. As you go through this presentation, and maybe you're kind of, examining your child and where they're at with their language, just know that it's a process and it takes time. Children go through the same stages of speech and language development, but because every child is unique, you're going to see that development in different ways, and you're going to see them develop at different speeds. So really don't feel discouraged if you feel like your child is moving at a pace that maybe is a little bit different than their peers. So before speech and language, children have to absorb language in the pre-language stage as babies. Before they hear their first word, it's really important that children receive as much language in their daily life as possible. Over time, with continued exposure to words, they begin to imitate what they hear. Not only that, but they imitate facial expressions that they see on people's faces. They imitate gestures. And then eventually, the pre-language imitation leads to speech and language, where children are able to understand what words mean, how to communicate, and so on and so forth. And, given those stages, how do children actually learn language? We see the process, but how do children get from point A to point B? Well, children learn language from us, right? So maybe this isn't a surprise to you, but for our children, we are their main source and model of language, which makes sense, right? We're around them every day. We talk to them every day. We talk around them to other people every day. They pick up on what they hear gradually over time. And it starts from the moment that they're born. Did you know that babies are able to tell languages apart at birth? So, like Spanish versus English, for example. As babies, they can already tell the difference in pitch, sound, rhythm, pace. So, babies are really born to take in language and learn. Children learn language by listening to us, how we speak, how we pronounce words, how we communicate with others. They also learn through experiencing the world around them and the way that we add words and meaning to what they're experiencing. Remember that most of your child's world is unknown to them until we make it known to them, right? And in this presentation, we want to reassure you that, yes, we do have this sort of responsibility and role in helping our children's language skills, but you don't need to do anything extraordinary, complicated, or super planned out to help strengthen those skills. Meaningful language learning can be achieved in those simple, day-to-day experiences that you're already having with your child. Your daily routines are a source of important language learning. So, what do daily routines have to do with strengthening speech and language? Well, your daily routines in your family life probably has some or most of these activities. Waking up, getting ready, brushing your teeth, eating breakfast, cleaning up, playtime, going to school, reading, other meal times, going for walks, watching TV, going to bed. These activities become language opportunities when we intentionally and simply just add some language to them. It's just as easy as that, right? Just talking to your child more and trying to communicate with them during these routine activities can go a long way in strengthening their language skills. Yes, even something as short as washing your hands together for 20 seconds can be impactful when you're modeling words and using language. Kashinath, Woods, and Goldstein in their study say that when developmental interventions are embedded in children's regular routines and activities, the skills learned are functional and meaningful for children and their caregivers. All right, that's a little bit wordy. Let's simplify that down a little bit further. So what that quote is saying, basically, when you model language for your child and provide opportunities for them to communicate daily, like through your routines and playtime, this teaches language and communication skills over time. Okay, this is why routines are so important, just because of their nature, of them being things you do every day. If you combine that with language, your child is learning language every day, and you don't need to change anything in your schedule. So let's give an example of how a daily routine activity over time can strengthen your child's speech and language. Pardon these little hiccups here with the graphics, but let's say that a part of something that you do in your maybe daily or weekly routine is to go on walks with your child to the park. So you bring a stroller with them, and you're sitting at a bench, your baby's on your lap, and you notice her starting to make some sounds, right? So she goes, ah, ah, ooh. And then you pick up on this and you say, yes, Samantha? And when you look at your baby, you notice that she's staring at something. She's looking at ducks in the pond or lake. Oh, so you notice that and you start to add some context to what she's focusing on. Oh, yes, duck. You see the duck. So what you're doing here is you're modeling how the word duck is pronounced You're giving her a label of something she is seeing. Until then, she had no idea that this thing floating in the water is called a duck until you made that association, right? You're also giving her a label for the action she's doing. She sees the duck. You see the duck. And then, okay, you leave the park, right? And then your baby forgets that she ever saw the duck. Until the next time you go to the park and you say, whoa, duck, Samantha, duck. And then the baby internally is like, oh, yeah, a duck. That is a duck. I saw that before. And then they might forget it again. So every day that you repeat the word and model language, it becomes stronger in their working memory. You need to repeat things to children when they're really young in order for them to really understand it and remember what it is that they're seeing and the names for those things. So babies, until we provide language for what they see, experience, and feel, they lack that context. We provide them with the vocabulary to understand their world. Meaningful interactions also leads to communication, right? So when we interact with our child and acknowledge their speech or their communication in speech, this is how we teach them those communication skills. So let's take a look at the same sort of interaction at a more communication standpoint, okay? So when babies go, ah, ah, ooh, it could be a couple things. So maybe they're just experimenting with their voice and trying to find out the limits of the sounds they can make. Other times they might use it to alert you or call out something that's really interesting to them. So in this situation, this baby is saying, oh, I'm seeing something. This is interesting to me. And they're communicating this to you. They're excited. They're curious. And as babies, they don't know that these sounds that they make have any meaning to them until we constantly or consistently respond. Okay, so your baby goes, ah, ah, ooh. Then you might notice this and you're like, yes, Samantha? And the baby's like, whoa, I made a sound. And then these two tall people with me made some sounds back at me. That was weird. And your baby kind of, forgets about that, and then she goes back to staring at the duck. She's like, I'm just going to keep looking at this thing in the water. And then Samantha suddenly hears two people talk again. Oh yes, duck. You see the duck? And then Samantha, her eyes wide, she's like, okay, I wasn't even talking that time. And these two tall people said something again. Don't know what to make of that, but okay, I guess that's what happens when I make sounds and look at things. So what your baby is learning here is that when they make sounds and gestures, parents respond to them. You're modeling conversation for your child every time that you respond to their interactions. So this is something that we need to be mindful of in these sort of daily things that we do with our children. Just something as simple as responding to a sound or just looking at what they're looking at can be really powerful in modeling communication. So as you can see, simple things, simple activities with your child can teach them a lot about what words mean, how to use language, and how to communicate. Daily routines then become powerful opportunities for learning language, with the results really shining over time. So in this section, we'll give you some ideas of what you can say during some of the everyday activities that you do with your child. If there's anything that you take away after this workshop, it's really important to say something instead of nothing in your day-to-day routines. So let's take a look at an example of a routine activity, and then I'll give you the framework that you can use to apply to any sort of thing you do with your child, whether it's something on these infographics or not. So getting dressed. This is a pretty average regular day-to-day activity with your child. It can be challenging for some parents to get their child dressed in the mornings, but if you are able to squeeze in some words in between the struggling, you can describe what you're doing, what's going on. You can say arms in, arms out when you're putting in a shirt or a sweater. You can say shorts up, shorts down. You can say pull. So when you describe these actions, you're giving them vocabulary. You're showing how words can be simply arranged together. You can also add a label to different things. Name the pieces of clothing that you're picking up or that you're helping them put on. You can also label body parts. This is helpful, especially when children are really young, because like we discussed, they don't know the names of these things until we teach them. And their working memory isn't so great. So by repeating them every day in your routines, it helps strengthen the words in their working memory, and it teaches them how to use language. And if your child is a little bit older and they're able to communicate with you, you might want to prompt them with some questions. So this is really good to model communication, where you ask a question and then they respond to you. So there's like a back and forth, right? So asking a simple yes/no question, and maybe even offering them a choice between A or B, is just a really good way to model like a back and forth, making a request type of communication. And even if your child isn't there yet, maybe they're not at the point where they say yes or no to things, or they make choices intentionally, if they say simple things like nana for banana or no, acknowledge that they attempted to communicate with you. It's so important for them to know that you respond to their speech and gestures. It makes them more confident to express themselves and use language on a daily basis. And this is the framework that you can use in any daily activity with your child. 1. Model the words and language that's relevant to the activity. So by modeling language and speech and words, your child is hearing how words are supposed to be correctly pronounced, and they also hear how they're supposed to be used functionally in day-to-day life. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Children's working memory when they're really young isn't so great, and repetition is the key for them to learn over time and remember, that this word means this word, and that this is how you arrange sentences when you speak. If you include language in your routines, the repetition is already built in because you do those things every day. If they're old enough to engage in a sort of back and forth communication, offer opportunities and questions for them where they can either protest, say no, request something, or describe something. And lastly, follow their attention and interest when appropriate. Maybe when you're getting dressed, they get really excited because they're wearing their favorite shirt, or outside the window they notice something interesting happening. Take advantage of these little small moments and see what other words you can model for them. The infographic that we'll send to you has a section for tips for babies, but just one tip that we want to highlight here is that it's so important to respond to your baby's communication cues. And this can include crying, gestures, eye gazes, pointing. All of these are ways our babies communicate with us before they actually can use spoken language. As we continue to model language for a child and they hear us talk to them every day, you don't want to forget when your babies take the initiative to talk to you in their own way. So let's get into a few more examples of some daily activities and some language that you can model for your children. So for diapering, lots of things you can describe, right? So you can say, ooh, dirty. And then after you're done cleaning them, you can say, all done, clean. You can say diaper on, off, legs up, legs down, wipe. Just think of the everyday words that are related to the activity and talk to them about it, explain what you're doing. Every day that you show them these words and phrases, you're building your baby's pre-language. Over time, they're going to remember and connect the words to the meaning and their actions that you're doing with them. So here we go with labeling again. This is super easy to do. What clothes are you going to put on? Tell them, pants, shorts, dress. You can also grab their feet, give them a little shake and say feet, toes, or grab their hands. You're labeling the important words that they're going to need to know in the future. You can also imitate them when they communicate with you. So if they're clapping, if they making sort of sounds like cooing or having their tongue out, do the same thing. They're going to see that and they're like, oh, this person is copying me. When I do this, they do that. So that initiates and shows them that there's like a back and forth language thing happening there. You can sing a song. Singing songs and music in general is an awesome way to teach your child language and get them interested in hearing words and speech. Washing hands. Lots of things you can label in there. Everything from the lights to the sink to the soap to your hands. Just label and tell your child what it is that they're interacting with and what they're seeing. It's also really helpful and easy to describe the actions. You can say turn on faucet, turn off faucet. Go, go, go. Okay, stop. All done. So there's lots of options that you have in any activity to include speech and language, right? Eating and snacking is also an awesome opportunity to teach your child how to make requests for when they eat food. So some of the words that you might want to use when you're modeling language for them during mealtime, say please, thank you, more, no more, all done, want, and eat, drink. And try this the next time that you're eating with your child. Instead of giving them the full banana the full bowl of chopped banana or maybe a bowl of grapes, maybe just give them 1 to 2 pieces of food at a time. So that way, when they want more or if they're still hungry, they can initiate a request with you. They can figure out or they can start to attempt to communicate to you and say, oh, I want more. So one thing you can do is maybe hold a piece of banana in front of them and say, more. And if they point to it or nod their head, that is already a successful interaction. And if they're able to say nana for banana, that's even better. So if they say nana, you say yes, banana, and then you give it to them. So really, eating and snacking time is an awesome opportunity to teach your child to make requests and have them initiate a communication with you. Really quickly, just going to go through bedtime, nap time options. Label the things in the room. Label the things that you see outside the window. Lots of opportunities there. You can also sing a song, a bedtime song, reading a book. Those are also 2 great sources of language and modeling speech. And then if they're old enough, you can also ask them some questions, simple questions, yes, no, and then offering choices. In general, these are going to be the 2 sorts of questions that you want to use when children are really young. So a yes, no, and then offering a choice. You don't want to get too complicated, and I'll explain why later with your questions. So we've given you just a few examples of how you can use your daily routines to strengthen language. We've given you some examples of words you can use and things you can say. And while there are more routine ideas on those infographics, you can really strengthen language anytime and anywhere. And there is a strategy that you can use to accomplish this. and it's called self-narrating. So with this strategy, maybe let's say you're not doing your daily routine activities now and you're outside, away from home, something different. You take on the role of a sports announcer. And what you're doing is labeling and telling your child everything that you're doing moment to moment, really. So they're not doing anything, they're just listening, taking in language, absorbing it. So in self-narration, you're explaining what you're doing, seeing, feeling, and experiencing. Here's an example of a self-narration that someone might do in their home. So, for example, I'm putting you in your high chair. I'm sitting next to you. Here's your milk. This is your cup. And you hold the cup and say, cup, we're going to eat lunch now. So here, your child is just listening to you talk. And there's so much vocabulary, so much language going on here. It's really a great thing to do around your child when you're not really sure what to do. Just talk to them. Just let them listen to you talk. And I know it might be a little weird to do this, to just talk to yourself, talk out loud, but it really does help your child absorb language skills, or absorb language in your day-to-day life. And then for all those times that you're not really doing your daily activities, just follow those principles of labeling what you can. Describe the world around them, add some words, add some new words that they haven't heard before. And then if they're old enough to communicate with you, verbally and answer questions, ask them those simple yes/no questions. Ask them to make a choice. Do you want this? Do you want that? That is a back and forth that really is helpful for learning how to communicate effectively in the future. So we talked a lot about, how to use your daily routines to build language. What are some things you can say, how to say it, and, that it's important to say it every day. We didn't really talk about what you need to be mindful of, or maybe things to avoid. And the first thing we're going to talk about is being mindful of asking open-ended questions. When your child is young and maybe they're late talkers, some of them may have trouble saying, I want this or I want that. It's best when they're young to start with simple questions. So those simple yes/no, offering choices. You're asking them to communicate in a non-overwhelming way. And when they get older, you can definitely ask them those open-ended questions. But for now, just keep it simple. Don't overwhelm them too much with trying to express themselves in communication. So also be mindful of rushing your child to speak or respond. This kind of creates some pressure in your child, maybe even resulting in some anxiety around communication, maybe some overwhelm. So really let them respond when they're ready to respond. It's okay if it takes some time. And in the same vein, try to avoid telling them, say ball or say mom. We don't really use say in our day-to-day conversations, right? We just say the word. We also want to avoid say because this can become the prompt for when our child speaks. So instead of them communicating, naturally to us, they might wait for us to say this word. You don't need to tell them say this to imitate a word or to say a word back to you. You can just say the exact word that you want them to tell you. So if you see a cow, just say cow and hold the toy cow in front of them. They'll know that that's what you want them to say. Cow. Cow. Okay, that was a little confusing, but I hope that made sense.